show Talking Politics with me, your host, Joseph Chitambo.
I want to bring our soldiers back home. We have right now 32,000 soldiers in South Korea. And I'd like to be able to bring them back home, but that's not part of the equation right now. At some point, I hope it will be, but not right now. We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should.
First of all, we'll be talking about the recent summit between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore. That happened yesterday, the 12th of June. So I'll be looking at that and seeing what happened there, what was achieved there. Did President Donald Trump, for example, concede too much? And did Kim Jong-un walk away with his tail raised high following the outcome of that summit? And we'll also touch on events in Zimbabwe. We always do talk about Zimbabwe on this program. So today we'll be talking about something that happened a few days ago. Many people will be familiar with the ongoing Parliamentary Portfolio Committee hearings, whereby leaders, former leaders, cabinet ministers are being asked to account for events that took place in different portfolios of government. So I'll be talking particularly about the former President Robert Mugabe's refusal to attend one of these hearings and the implications on that on the credibility of the current government. And we'll also talk about the situation going on at the moment with respect to one of the former ministers in former President Robert Mugabe's cabinet, Sevia Kasukuwere. Many people will remember that following the coup in November 2017, Sevia Kasukuwere and a few of his colleagues left Zimbabwe amid a flurry of accusations of corruption and all types of things. Following his return, he was, he's being prosecuted, obviously, on charges other than corruption. And we want to examine what is happening in that respect. And again, we want to see what the implications are on the credibility of the current government and what was promised by this government to the people of Zimbabwe following what was widely touted as the new dispensation. But to kick off the program, first of all, we will touch on the summit in Singapore. So we saw Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un finally, after a series of on-off, we finally saw them meeting at a summit on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in Singapore. And before that event, we heard a lot from President Donald Trump through his regular tweets, obviously, and through some of his officials, notably the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, about what were promised to be something unprecedented coming out of this summit. Did that really happen? We'll look at that closely. So many people after the summit have been asking, and there have been a lot of debate out there about who actually won coming out of this summit. What was achieved through this summit? And what is the way forward? First of all, some people are saying, wow, look, nothing was achieved at all in terms of the American position going into this summit. As I said, President Donald Trump made a lot of promises to the people, to the American people, to his allies in Asia, particularly South Korea and Japan, obviously, two countries which have a vested interest in what is going on the Korean Peninsula. So President Trump, going into this summit, was looking at complete irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Did he achieve that? Well, looking at the facts on the ground and looking at the communique that came out following this summit, one is persuaded that that was not achieved at all. And I will explain why. President Trump went into this summit amid high expectations. Expectations that he had set himself, first of all. Nobody else had set out these expectations for him. But following the conclusion of this summit, we were told that, in fact, what we had were some vague commitments or some vague promises that the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, had made to Donald Trump, that he was going to, well, promise to denuclearize or something to that effect, but without any concrete promises. For example, without indicating when this denuclearization will occur, what form it will take, and who actually is going to police this denuclearization. On the other hand, President Donald Trump, he made a very significant promise to Chairman Kim, as he calls him, his new best friend. He promised that America, the United States of America, and South Korea were going to stop what he termed the war games. Now, many people who understand or who have been following events on the Korean Peninsula will know that every year the United States of America and the South Koreans, they engage in joint military exercises in South Korea, which is meant to, as a show of strength, obviously, towards North Korea, as a deterrent towards North Korea. Now, President Donald Trump has promised to stop that. Much to the surprise of his allies in South Korea, they were caught off guard by that statement, and they immediately issued a statement saying, oh, well, we need more clarity on what President Trump actually means when he said that we were going to stop these joint military exercises. Now, to those people who understand the situation on the Korean Peninsula, the joint military exercises, as I said before, these are a show of strength, a show of force by the United States and its allies, a show of force which is meant to deter the North Koreans in case they were planning on an attack. Now, to simply give up this deterrent mechanism without any concrete promises on the part of the North Koreans, many people have seen this as some form of capitulation on the part of Donald Trump. Many people will be wondering what was going through his head when he made that announcement without consulting with his South Korean counterparts, for example, sidestepping his allies. And some of the reasons that he gave for promising to stop these joint military exercises were that, well, they were expensive anyway, so we might as well get rid of them. Well, that is nonsense. In a situation as dangerous as that, at the situation in the Korean Peninsula, a show of strength is necessary. This is what has managed to deter the North Koreans for many years. And now to simply drop that because Kim Jong-un has demanded that as a condition for making some vague promise on denuclearization, one can see that President Trump has probably been outmaneuvered here by Kim Jong-un. One can see that to the North Koreans, This appears to be, a victory. They've actually walked out with their tails raised high because they've achieved what they wanted, which is the cessation of these joint military exercises, which is something that has been a persistent worry for them for a long time. And in return, they didn't really have to make any concrete promises. They didn't have to give up their nuclear arsenal. Kim Jong-un actually walked away with his nuclear arsenal nicely tucked under his armpit. And you can imagine the atmosphere back home in North Korea, for example. They see him as as a hero, someone who has managed to sit at a table with the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States of America, and walked away with huge concessions for nothing, without giving away anything at all. Now we know the other thing that many people have been asking. Some people have been saying, well, this is a first step, so let's see what happens. Well, fairly fine. But the difficulty here is to understand where exactly do you start when you have already given so much ground, when you have already given up, well, what President Donald Trump is literally dropped his weapons. When Chairman King called him to do so. So just like drop your weapons, and then he dropped them. Simple as that. And the North Koreans, one would ask, what motivation would they have to give away such an important negotiating tool as their nuclear arsenal? Remember, this is the same tool that enabled them to be on the same negotiating table as Donald Trump. Prior to that, obviously, well, we all know that Kim Jong-un was being called a lot of names. He was a pariah, actually, in terms of his international status. But President Donald Trump's gushing praise of him, he called him an intelligent leader, a leader who loves his people, and a strong negotiator or something to that. Well, we now know that he's a strong negotiator because he managed to walk away with what he wanted without giving away anything at all. And what happened to the little fake dictator that Donald Trump tweeted only a few months ago? The little dictator that he threatened to blow away with his massive nuclear weapons. All of a sudden, he is this nice, people-loving leader. Well, Mr. Trump, you have just been outmaneuvered there. And President Trump himself admitted, well, though not in full, he said that he doesn't know what is going to happen in about, in the next few months, or he would find out in the next 6 months. We all know that we've been here before. The North Koreans have made promises before with previous United States administrations, with Bill Clinton, for example, in 1994, I think, and with President George W. Bush, 2005. They made the same promises. Well, there wasn't any summit at that moment, but they made similar promises. They made similar promise to denuclearize, to not develop nuclear weapons. Now we know that they've actually developed these nuclear weapons. They've got them. And now they've got the one most important tool that enables them to negotiate with the United States of America, almost on equal terms. Well, many people will argue that it's not equal terms, but look, if you see what happened in Singapore, for example, you cannot put a sustained argument that Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump did not look like they were, negotiating on equal terms. Look at the setup, for example. The American flag interspaced with the Korean flag as equals. That was an important thing in this whole negotiation, and the Koreans would have insisted that that happened because they didn't want to be seen as a junior partner in these negotiations. But because Donald Trump was so eager to portray himself as the first American president to meet face to face with the leader of North Korea, he overlooked all those things. And in so doing, he legitimized somebody who is inarguably a ruthless dictator, someone who threatened to obliterate South Korea or to unleash, a sea of fire, as the North Koreans like to say, on South Korea, Japan, even the United States. Only a few months ago, they were saying these things. But Donald Trump chose to overlook those things because he wanted to appear in front of the cameras. He was most interested in the pageantry of the whole thing. And in the end, he gave a lot of ground to the North Koreans. And now I'll say this again, the North Koreans, as things stand at the moment, they have no motivation at all to give up their nuclear weapon. Why would they? Those nuclear weapons allowed them to sit at a table with Donald Trump and derive a lot of concessions from him. Well, I guess we'll have to see what happens. As President Trump said, in 6 months' time, we'll see what happens. But my point is that we've been here before, not once, not twice, many times. We're dealing here with a recalcitrant dictatorship that will not give up its power. A dictatorship that has suddenly discovered that to have a nuclear weapon is to be able to talk to the most powerful nation on earth on equal terms. So why would they give away that nuclear arsenal? These are the questions that President Trump perhaps could answer, but well, I guess we are not going to hear anything of that sort from him. And as I said before, the North Koreans, in order for them to comply, they do not require an agreement, a piece of paper, as we saw in Singapore. That doesn't mean anything to them. What they need is the big stick. And the big stick is the annual military exercises. In my view, that should have stayed as a deterrent and as a show of force, as a show of resolve from the United States to say, if you don't comply with ABC, we are still parked nicely at your doorstep and we've got our weapons pointed at you. But Donald Trump took that away. Perhaps we're wrong, but we'll see in a few months' time. Now we'll move on to our next topic for today, something that will probably interest our audience in Zimbabwe and in the diaspora as well. We have been witnessing lately the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee hearings in Zimbabwe. These are meant as hearings whereby former ministers, including the former president as well, and people in government generally, people who have been making decisions in government to account for some of the events or decisions that happened under their portfolios. Now, many people who have been following this will know that under the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee for Mines. We had the former minister Obed Mpofu a few weeks ago walking out of one of these meetings, and at that time we asked what was going to happen to him. Were there any consequences for what he did? Because to simply walk out of such a it's actually a contempt of Parliament, because these committees have got they derive their authority from Parliament or from an act of Parliament. And we've just seen a current minister and a former minister in a previous government walking away from these hearings without any consequences at all. And this is a minister who is currently serving under the presidency of our current president, Emerson Mnangagwa. Well, many people, I certainly expected the current president to do something about it, because one of his ministers just showed contempt to Parliament. One of the three arms of government, without any consequence at all. And this president wants us to believe that under this new so-called new dispensation, things are going to be different, that things are going to be done differently from the way they were done under the leadership of Robert Mugabe. What makes anybody believe that? One of his ministers just thumped his nose at one of the parliamentary portfolio committees. Is he not showing that he's above the law by walking out? And then we have the former president refusing to come to one of these, to the same parliamentary portfolio committee hearing twice. First of all, when he didn't turn up, we were told that, oh, maybe the time that was scheduled for his appearance was too early for him because, well, because of his age. So I understand the appointment was rescheduled later on, like later in the day, to allow the former president to be able to attend. But he still failed to attend. And again, we hear that the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee of Mines has basically, given up, and they have actually recused the former president from attending any further hearings. What is that about? What message are they sending here? And again, what we want to know is, are there any consequences for this? And what does this say about the credibility of the current president, who wants all and sundry to believe that things will be done differently, that he's going to deal with corruption? Well, I mean, many people were waiting to hear from Robert Mugabe himself what about the disappearance of the 15 billion United States dollars from the diamond mines in Zimbabwe. A lot of people would have a lot of interest in that, but now I guess we'll never know. And one of the reasons that I think everybody was okay with President Robert Mugabe not attending is because of what he was possibly going to disclose if he had managed to attend these hearings. If he had attended, it's highly likely that he was going to say things there that would touch on many people in the current government, perhaps including the highest level. And that's why everybody is okay with him not attending. $15 billion is a lot of money. And for former President Robert Mugabe to say that amount of money went missing, I believe he said that in March 2016, one would want to believe that he knew what he was talking about at that time, or that he had the evidence that that amount of money went missing, and he knew how it went missing. These were the questions that, well, he should have answered. These are the questions that many people in Zimbabwe want to be answered. And now we are told that he's not going to give that evidence at all. Does that mean that the current government doesn't care about the $15 billion that went missing? Or does it mean that perhaps they know where it is, or who caused it to make it to go missing? But again, it just eats away at the credibility of the current government. One is persuaded to think that all these parliamentary portfolio committee hearings that are going on are just a charade to give a smokescreen, to give some semblance of accountability under this new administration. Some kind of ploy to hoodwink the people of Zimbabwe to think that things are now being done differently, that this government is going to be accountable to the people of Zimbabwe. Well, I'm not convinced. And many people out there are not convinced that there's anything different that is being done by this government that is different from what was happening before under the leadership of Robert Mugabe. Anyway, we'll move on to our topic, and before we do, our next topic, and before we do, we'll take a small break. Stay tuned.
Extreme Airs Youth Conference 2018. This is the year that we thank God who has brought us this far. It surely will be a spiritually moving weekend from Thursday the 5th to Sunday the 8th of July 2018. Lots and lots of fun, as the youth will say. It will definitely be lit. Games, concert night, workshops, counseling sessions, preachings and teachings. Melbourne, Australia, Foothill Conference Centre, Murubark. Guest speakers, Dr. Thaddeus Mawoko, Dr. Gwen Mawoko. National Youth Directors, Pastor Ed Hove, Pastor Carol Hove. National Youth Chairperson, Brother Jackson Cheeser. Registration $300 Western and $320 Eastern States. Contact numbers, that's 0455 620 452, or you can contact them on 0405 368 525. Hande ikoko, toenda ikoko.
Welcome back to the show, Talking Politics, with me, your host, Joseph Chitambo. Before the break, we talked about the summit, the denuclearization summit in Singapore between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. We also talked about the parliamentary portfolio committee hearings in Zimbabwe, and the fact that some leaders or former leaders are refusing to attend these hearings, and one former cabinet minister who is also a current, cabinet minister in the current government, actually walked out of this one of these hearings without any, consequences. And the question then was, what does that do to the credibility of the current government and the promises that they have made to the people of Zimbabwe? Now we'll move on to our next topic, which again touches on the credibility of the current government in Zimbabwe. We've got a lot of issues going on in Zimbabwe. Obviously, this is why we keep talking about these issues. Recently, we just witnessed the return to Zimbabwe of one of the former cabinet ministers in the government of former President Robert Mugabe. Sevia Kasukwere returned to Zimbabwe after having skipped the country following the coup in November 2017. Now, when the coup happened in November, obviously after Kasukwere and some of his colleagues had skipped the country, by whatever means they left the country, we were shown pictures ostensibly showing how corrupt they are or how corrupt they were. And they were, variously labeled as, the criminals that were, surrounding the former president, Robert Mugabe, and that they needed to be dealt with, which was one of the reasons why the coup happened. We were shown, for example, the mansion that Sevia Kasikuwere had built in one of the suburbs in Zimbabwe, a multi-roomed mansion in one of the most exclusive areas in Zimbabwe. And obviously those pictures were meant to show how corrupt he was. And the suggestion then was, well, if he could afford to build such an expensive looking home, he must have engaged in some kind of corrupt activities. Well, I don't doubt that he did engage in corrupt activities. And I know that many people don't doubt that he engaged in corrupt activities. But that is not what we are talking about today. The issue we're going to talk about is, following Sevia Kasikuwere's return, we've seen he's being arraigned before the courts in Zimbabwe at the moment. And the next question would be, what are the charges? What is he being charged with? This would be surprising to many people. Of all the charges, of all the hype that was built around the supposed corruption of Sevia Kasikuwere and some of his colleagues, he is being charged with leaving the country illegally or crossing the borders through a point that is not designated for crossing. How pathetic is that? How pathetic is that? Many people, I was certainly expecting Sevia Kasikuwere to be charged of high corruption, for example. Because that's what we're meant to believe when this new government took over. That him and some of his colleagues in the what was called the G40 faction were engaging in criminal activities, or that they were usurping the power of the president, for example, or influencing the president, or something to that effect. Besides stealing from the population of Zimbabwe, obviously, but surely to charge him with violating a section of the Immigration Act, I mean, that is laughable. That is laughable. And this can only mean one thing: that this current government, besides all that they've said before, telling us all this, this thing about corruption and that the intention to deal with it, that they have no intention at all of dealing with those issues. And one of the reasons is that if they try to deal with these issues, it could actually come back to haunt them, because they are, linked into some of these activities. Let's not forget, these were the same people engaging in the same corrupt activities. And therefore, to put one of their own through a trial, presumably, a transparent, fair trial, that would expose a lot of things that would invariably touch on them as well. And this is why they are not, this is why they are not charging Kasikuwere, for example, with any corrupt activities. And now they've looked at, a really silly kind of charge to place on him, violating the Immigration Act. Really? Who really cares whether he jumped the border or not? Many people in Zimbabwe are doing that. If this government wanted to charge people for crossing the border at undesignated points, they might as well charge the entire population of Zimbabwe, or a large section of the population of Zimbabwe, because many people have crossed the borders of Zimbabwe through undesignated crossing points. And as Sevia Kasikuwere is, argued in court, I was just reading one of the an article from one of the news outlets in Zimbabwe. His argument is that, look, if you are going to charge me with violating a section of the Immigration Act, that I crossed, the borders at an undesignated point, then you might as well charge Robert Mugabe, for example, because he crossed the borders during the Liberation War, obviously, at undesignated point, and he has actually said that himself, and he was called, a hero for doing that. So Xavier's argument is, why charge me now? If you are going to charge me, go and charge Robert Mugabe as well and many other people with the same crime. But I will argue this: the reason that they have, of all the possible charges that they could have thrown at Xavier Kasukure, the reason that they've chosen this particular one is that in the end, they know that it won't stick. They know that in the end, he'll be a free man. He'll be free to engage in politics, rejoin ZANU-PF, which is what has been talked about for a long time. So this is exactly what the intention of all this was. All this charade about Xavier Kasukure going through this hearing. We've seen videos of the magistrates, the lawyers, inspecting his bullet-riddled home. We've heard about how many bullets were found in his home. I think about 127 bullets or something. Obviously, Kasukure is arguing that he had to flee because his life was in danger. And all this is just a charade. If they were really interested in making Xavier Kasukure accountable for his actions when he was a cabinet minister, I'm sure they would have found a lot of activities that he engaged in that could merit a court hearing, and that would result in a conviction. But no, they're not going to do that because they do not want something that will come back to haunt them. This is why we are seeing all this. From me today, thank you very much for watching. Catch us next time on our second program of episode 2 of Talking Politics with Joseph Chitambo. We will be talking about the MDC manifesto in our next program, and we'll be touching about the elections as well, election 2018. Now we know that the presidential elections will be happening at the end of June. So we'll be talking about that in our next program. So make sure you catch us in our next program next week. Thank you very much for watching.